Well, hello everyone. I'm Jill Bloom, publisher of Roofing Contractor, Walls and Ceilings and Building Enclosure, and thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're watching on video or listening on podcast, we are really glad you are here today. I'm here with Hannah Bololi, the associate editor of Walls and Ceilings, and we are so honored to be talking today with three very knowledgeable gentlemen. Trent Cotney, the CEO of Cotney's Attorneys and Consultants, Albert Carrillo, the CEO of the Western Wall and Ceiling Contractor Alliance, and John Nessie, the attorney with Management Guidance, LLP, and is general counsel to the Signatory Wall and Ceiling Alliance, along with many employers and employer associations in labor relations matters around the country. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
So we specifically are here to give the contractors the insight they need to understand a piece of the PRO Act, which is the Contractor Misclassification. And we've had some calls after the last video that we posted with Trent on this. And so we wanted to get you gentlemen together to really give some insight and educate contractors on really what they need to know. So Albert, let's start with you. Can you just fill us in on what your questions were and what kind of prompted you to ask those questions?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me, and hello, everybody out there in video land. Our association, WWCCA, works with signatory contractors in the Southwest region, and for a number of years, we're dealing with what we call contractor misclassification, and it's kind of gone to where a contractor will hire individuals and classify them as independent contractors. As an independent contractor, they're responsible for all the state taxes and the workers' comp and all those other costs because they're classified as contractors. So what that does is that lowers the bidding price for the prime contractor, and it just kind of trickles down to where the guy in the field, who may not know he's responsible for everything else, just doesn't pay those bills, and it costs taxpayers a ton of money. And of course, then we have the whole safety factor that goes with that, the OSHA compliance and all that other stuff, because as independent contractors, everybody's responsible for their own well-being of their own little company. So it's become a big, big problem. We are doing everything we can to bring awareness to this issue. And irrespective of the PRO Act, throughout the Southwest, we have a large immigration population here, being so close to the border, that this has been happening for a number of years. Recently, down in San Diego, the Carpenters Union got with some local people down there, a district attorney and the chair of the San Diego supervisors, to talk about this very issue and what can we do about it. And these two individuals down there are passing a bill to make contractor misclassification a felony, and as it relates to theft. So they consider not paying a worker the proper salary, overtime, benefits, and all that's required by state law. They consider it a theft. And so when it hits that $900 mark, it's now going to become a felony. So they're passing a bill to make legislation it's a felony violation. We hope to take that model and plug it in everywhere else. The way to get on top of this is to make violations punishable, and not only just a slap on the wrist, but punishable by jail time, by costs. So that's a quick overview of what we deal with out here. Of course, all of our members are the ones that pay all the bills and pay the taxes and do everything well. And when I was asked to speak down there at this tax fraud day, it dawned on me that it goes well beyond just a lack of paying tax or a lack of paying a guy overtime. Our contractors, when they get work, they do more than just do the work and take the money and just go buy boats and planes and cars. They reinvest back into infrastructure, back into people, and back into knowledge. So there's a return of the money back into the economy. And it's just a well-oiled machine that's been working, i.e. the middle class. So that's being chipped away at. And when our members are beat out significantly on bids, there's a downstream or a trickle effect that's becoming epidemic. And so we want to make sure that we get the word out to people that, hey, this is happening. it's an ongoing issue.
Mm-hmm. So we're gonna start off with, hey, Trent, could you explain to us just the latest news on the PRO Act and then what it means when we hear contractor misclassification?
Sure. So the PRO Act is currently got House support. It's passed in the House and it's still in the Senate. But as far as misclassification, I think Albert kind of hit the head on some good issues there.
Mm-hmm.
The issue that you really got to be concerned about is if you're using subcontract labor or a subcontractor to perform work on a project, are they really a subcontractor or are they just your employees? You're just not properly classifying them that way. So the one thing that I want to kind of hit home to our listeners is there's nothing wrong with hiring a subcontractor. Okay, hiring a subcontractor is perfectly legal and fine.
Mm-hmm.
The issue becomes where you have a subcontractor that only works for you, that doesn't work for anybody else, that doesn't advertise, that you control every aspect of what they do on a daily basis. And as a result, you may not be paying them properly, or you may not be paying them the right way, or you're not, obtaining I-9s on them, or there's a variety of other things, insurance, all those types of things. The real crux of it from a construction standpoint, a lot of it is how do you go about determining whether or not someone is truly a 1099, an independent contractor, or an employee. And a lot of it comes within sort of the testing that you look at to determine what's what. So for the longest time, the test was sort of a 7-factor test, economic realities test, where you kind of looked at the totality of the circumstances to determine whether or not this subcontractor or this independent contractor was acting independently or was really misclassified. The Trump administration tried to scale that back and created a couple of factors to focus on, in particular, 3 others that were consideration points. But the Biden administration has reversed that, and now there is a push towards what's known as the ABC test, which is it's a fairly high standard. California has used this test a lot, and it's a fairly high standard for independent contractors to pass. My concern obviously is I believe that, subcontract labor should be independent, that there should be, they should be properly classified, that to the extent that they need to pay taxes, insurance, withholdings, whatever they need to do, they should be able to do it. What I don't want to have happen is I don't want the ambiguity of some of these tests to create overreaching that may throw somebody into that pile that really shouldn't be there. It's not a bright line test. It's a sliding scale. So there is some ambiguity there. And I guess that's my concern from the perspective of a lawyer that represents contractors. So.
Mm-hmm. So John, what does contractor misclassification mean for your contractors? Are you getting a lot of worry about this part of the PRO Act?
Sure. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on when you're listening to this. First of all, I want to make clear that I'm not here to talk about the PRO Act. I'm really here to talk about employee misclassification more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
SWACA, the Signatory Wall and Ceiling Contractors Alliance that I represent, and the group that really is the reason I'm here today, did not take a position on the PRO Act. But we do have a lot of strong feelings about employee misclassification broadly. So pleased to be here and have the opportunity to talk about that. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a lot of concerns about employee misclassification in construction for decades, really. Albert, I think, outlined that nicely. Albert and I both worked with a lot of employers in the wall and ceiling industry. So framing walls, hanging drywall, hanging ceilings. And that's an industry that is really plagued by employee misclassification. In the more egregious examples, you'll have a scenario where, let's say that a contractor is hanging drywall in an office tower, and they've got 40 or 50 people doing that work. And again, in the most egregious examples, they'll have 40 or 50 people operating, each one of them as an independent contractor, but clearly acting as a crew. And the reason that they want to do that is to avoid the things that Albert mentioned: workers' compensation, unemployment insurance premiums. They want to avoid any obligations to pay overtime or even minimum wage. And they're pushing all of that risk down to those individuals And I think in the example that I'm laying out, that's an illegal misclassification scheme. I don't want to tell you that it's never okay to have an independent contractor on a job site. Like there are a lot of good examples, the carpenter that might come in and do, very intricate carving or trim work in your home is probably a one-man band, and that's an independent contractor, right? But if you're installing the trim in an office building and you've got 20 guys doing it, or even 5 guys doing it, the idea that each one of those individuals is an independent business, an independent contractor, to me just flies in the face of reality. So that's the issue that I want to talk about today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do we think that right now in this current climate of the world, it makes sense to work as a sub? And John, you can start answering that, and then we can move to Trent and to Albert.
Yeah, so, I want to make clear that there's a distinction between a subcontractor and an independent contractor. Mm-hmm. So a subcontractor is simply a contractor that is beneath the top layer on a particular project. So traditionally, you've got the owner who hires a general contractor to perform a project, and then the owner is subcontracting specific scopes of work to individual subcontractors, right? And so you've got a drywall company that's doing the drywall scope of work, and that drywall company might have, 100 employees. So what we're talking about is where instead of having 100 employees working for that drywall company, you've got 100 individuals that are operating as independent contractors. And so that's the scenario that I'm trying to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a question for you, John. So if I am a contractor working on a job and there are 50 or 100 other contractors on the job site, what do I need to know that I can protect myself?
So Jill, are you asking from the perspective of a worker or from a contractor, or which way are we looking at it?
Well, in this way specifically as the worker, I think we should answer that from Hannah and I were talking about that earlier. That's something we should probably answer if we can for the listeners from both sides of that question.
Sure.
If I'm the employer or if I'm the contractor.
So first of all, I represent employers, and
right.
I represent employers exclusively, employers and employer associations. But if I were a worker that was working as an independent contractor, I would want to make sure that I was actually an independent contractor. And if you're there as part of a crew of people where everybody is similarly classified as an independent contractor, to me, that's a giant red flag. If you actually have, and you feel like you have your own legitimate business where you're procuring your own work, you're going out and doing it on your own schedule, presumably you've got a scope of work that you can perform on your own. You don't need a crew of people to help you with it. That's a legitimate independent contractor arrangement. But again, if you're part of a crew, that's a giant red flag. And if you're working as an independent contractor, you've got to understand that you're not going to be protected by workers' compensation insurance. So if you get hurt and you can't perform your job anymore, you don't have any recourse against the people that hired you. You're going to end up going out and making no money, right? You're going to end up on public assistance in some form. You also have to worry about the fact that you need to pay your self-employment taxes, which is more taxes than you would pay as an employee. You have to pay the employer's share of the payroll taxes. You've got to worry about unemployment. And if you get laid off, how are you going to provide for your family or even for yourself if you have zero income during that period? So things like that are the reasons that individual workers should be concerned about whether they're being classified as an independent contractor or an employee. And again, I think people in that situation ought to understand the law and pursue the employee classification, assuming that's the appropriate classification for them.
Mm-hmm. Trent or Albert, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. When just the use of the term contractor implies what really happens. There's a contract. There's an agreement on paper between individual A and individual B for a scope of work to be completed. If you're not in there negotiating your contract for your scope of work, then you're a worker. If you're a contractor, you're saying, I'll do this for you. I agree to do pay all the taxes. I'm a legitimate businessman. Here is a signed contract. So as a worker out there, if you're not being asked to sign a contract or just go work for hours, you'll probably begin misclassified. There's no guarantee of overtime pay. Overtime pay is time and a half. That's required for anything over 40 hours. So there's a lot of things. I think John touched on most of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would say, just to kind of echo what both John and Albert have said, you know, if you are a drywall contractor and you have 20 crew members that you are paying on a 1099 basis as independent contractors, clearly that's a problem, right? I think where it becomes a little bit more ambiguous is where if you are a drywall contractor and you stroke a check to a drywall subcontractor that only works for you, that doesn't work for anybody else, that doesn't market, that doesn't advertise. So the issue that I've faced a lot is that analysis where you have a government entity, regardless of whether it's state or federal, come in, regardless of whether it's, you know, DOL from the labor side or OSHA, and they take a look at it and they say, well, you've really misclassified this whole entity because really they are just your employees. So I think that's where it becomes a little clearer. I agree wholeheartedly that if you've got, you know, 50 people that you're all just paying cash under the table, clearly that's a problem. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Where it becomes a little bit more difficult to analyze is where you're applying these tests to entire groups that are hired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as a company, what are the guidelines that I need to follow and be aware of to ensure that none of my contractors are misclassified? And we can start with Trent and then move to John and Albert if you have anything to.
Sure. So if they're your employee, so for example, I've got a lot of employees. I don't know how many, I just know what the payroll looks like, right? So, you know, I've got to do withholding. I've got to do payroll tax. I've got to pay benefits. I've got to properly keep I-9s. There's a variety of other tax information I have to do. I've got to have insurance. I got to have workers' comp along with all kinds of other insurance, right? So if I'm a contractor and they are my employees, then I have to keep all of that. And I've got to make sure that that's being done. If I am hiring, let's say I'm hiring a subcontractor, well, as part of the process, part of the SOP or standard operating procedure in hiring a subcontractor is you would want to make sure that they've got, you know, certificate of insurance that shows that they're covered workers' comp, general liability, all, you know, commercial auto, all the types of things that they need to have. That if they are in a jurisdiction that requires licensure, that they've got licensure, that they are a properly operating, functioning business in whatever state that you're doing work in, you know, check and make sure they've been around for a while, they've got a good reputation, all those types of things you would do as part of your normal onboarding process if you were to hire a sub. And then, you know, with regard to just stroking a check to an individual, that there's always some problems there, right? That should just be a red flag in general, because unless they are a super specialist, to go back to like what Albert said, let's say this is like, you know, the carpenter trim person that can only do this specific style of teak wood carving, then yeah, it could just be some guy down the street. That's all he does, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, that's what I like to recommend to contractors is just like you have an onboarding process for your employees. If you're looking to stroke a check to someone outside of that process, you need an SOP that goes through certain requirements to make sure they are checking the boxes for the things that they need to have mm-hmm. in order to be legal and legit.
Mm-hmm. John, any additions?
No, I mean, I think Trent nailed it. Mm-hmm. The thing that is cause for concern is the fact that independent contractor arrangements have become so pervasive in the construction industry. And, you know, frankly, a lot of contractors aren't doing what Trent just outlined. And you end up with a scenario where, you know, really a home could be built almost entirely by independent contractors and the homeowner never knows it, right? Mm-hmm. You've got a general contractor that's hired to build a home. They bring in the flooring guy, they bring in the drywall guy, and they bring it, you know, and they're bringing in 5 drywall guys or 5 flooring guys, and they're all working together as a crew. And what's happening, and what has been happening more and more over the last 10 to 20 years, is that that's becoming the standard way of doing business. And when things become a standard within an industry, people just look at their peers and they say, oh, well, they've got 5 different drywall guys on their project, and they've got 5 different flooring guys on their project. Mm-hmm. I should be doing the same thing. And where this becomes particularly challenging is the fact that the guys that are doing that, the ones that have 5 drywall guys or 5 flooring guys working as independent contractors, they're winning the bids. They're cheaper because They're not paying taxes. They're not paying unemployment. They're not paying workers' compensation. And now taxpayers end up picking up the bill for a lot of that stuff through social support programs. But the people that are purchasing the product only see the price and they don't know any better. And then the contractors that are employing those arrangements are winning more projects because they're cheaper. And then their competitors look at that and say, gosh, I need to be doing the same exact thing or I'm not going to be in business for very long. And so, it's sort of a proverbial race to the bottom, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But to me, when it becomes that standard way of doing business and the guys that are trying to follow the law, trying to do what Trent just outlined, can't compete effectively any longer, that's when you've got a real problem. And I think that's where a large segment of the industry is at these days.
Mm-hmm. Albert, any additional comments? I'm sure that Trent and John answered every avenue to that question.
They cover it very well, and there's one little phrase that they say they're paying in cash, and it's not illegal to pay somebody in cash. That's not an illegal practice. What is illegal is when you pay them cash without taking any deductions or giving them a receipt for what they've earned, showing them the hours and all the legal things that you have to do. So cash pay, I think, gets kind of thrown out there as, oh, they're cheating, they're paying cash. I think the term, under the table means it's a lump sum and it's being divvied out. And we could go into just horror stories of this, akin to trafficking. And I don't want to get too dark on this whole thing, but it's pervasive. It's getting worse and worse. It's been around for decades, yes, but I think it's time that we all get up and talk about it and say, hey, this is real. And one point I wanted to make, John mentioned that the price keeps going down and down and down, but the price of the homes never go down. The price of the new buildings never go down. They're going up and up and up. So there's this wider gap of this fund of money that's being distributed somewhere, not to the tax base, not into society, not into improving anything. It's being taken somewhere. We don't know where.
Right.
Which is great and why we're all here to help educate employers or contractors. So John, I got a question for you. So if I'm an employer and I know that I've got somebody else out there who's doing exactly that, they've got 50 guys on a job and they're all, what can I do? Like, how do we turn this around? What can we tell everybody who's watching and listening? Like, here's the first thing you need to do if you know that this is happening, or how do we fix it? How do we make it better?
Jill, I wish it were an easy answer.
Yeah, I know.
Trent mentioned that he represents employers that are dealing with inquiries from state or the federal Department of Labor. And that's typically where the enforcement occurs. There are some private rights of action where an individual can sue the person or the employer that misclassified them. Those things are very difficult though. And it's, especially when you're dealing with a scenario where you've got a project that lasted for a finite period of time and you're trying to pursue a claim based on that particular project, the dollar value might not rise to a level at which it's really worth pursuing. And I mean that whether it's an individual or the state or federal government that's pursuing those claims. So a lot of this stuff happens under the table, does not get revealed, and it just sort of goes on. Now, when contractors do get caught, there are a number of examples where they've just been absolutely decimated by the government, where they come in and they're going to get hit with fines. There can be jail time associated with these types of violations. And there's a lot of different reasons why a contractor should really avoid doing this and taking on this risk. So if I'm in the shoes of somebody that says, hey, my competitors are doing this, I might find one of those examples from my local market and try to hold that out in front of them somehow and say, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. Maybe you call the State Department of Labor or even the Federal Department of Labor and hope that they do something about it. I'll add that the building trades unions will help pursue these things. So you find the union that represents the trade that is being exploited on that particular project. You call them up, you say, hey, I've got information on this. Now, a non-union contractor might be reluctant to call a union, but let me tell you, that union might be your best hope for dealing with that competitor that's competing against you unfairly. So to me, those are some potential avenues for recourse.
So as we're wrapping up here, I do want to switch veins just a little bit. And Trent, you can start by answering this question. So OSHA recently enacted an emergency temporary standard for COVID-19 and healthcare workers. So this currently does not involve the construction industry, which some people thought that maybe our construction industry would be hit with something similar to this. So can you just share a little bit of insight on that, and what does that mean, and what's the future for situations like this, do you think?
Sure. So, that's an interesting question, Hannah. And, we have been working with Craig Brydup, our national lobbyist, on this issue. And from a construction standpoint, the COVID-19 guidance from OSHA has mirrored a lot of what the CDC has come out with. And OSHA got a lot of flack at the beginning of COVID for basically doing not much, right? So it was kind of we all kind of knew that there was going to be an attempt to get an emergency temporary standard in place. As this vaccines evolved and the guidance evolved, it became clear that it was going to be more and more difficult from a federal approach to put forth an ETS, especially because they knew they were going to be facing some litigation. So it looks like right now what they have done is focused on the healthcare industry, putting an emergency temporary standard together for that. And they put out some renewed guidance for construction. We try to report on that, and there are a lot of great regulations already in place that can assist contractors in navigating these difficult issues. Everything from the PPE standards to the general duty clause to a variety of other things that I think are important. But that's kind of where it stands right now. I mean, who knows? This just like COVID, this is constantly evolving. So we'll see where we are this time next year.
Mm-hmm. John and Albert, do you have any thoughts on like what you're doing for your businesses revolving the COVID vaccines?
I do actually want to follow up on the OSHA question, Hannah. So one of the important things that independent contractors need to understand is that they're generally responsible for their own OSHA compliance as well. And so there are safety issues associated with working as an independent contractor. And I don't know that COVID's the best example there. But certainly other risks exist on construction job sites, and independent contractors are, again, generally responsible for their own compliance with the OSHA standards. And so that's an important feature of working in that environment. And so I think you had asked about COVID-19 more broadly.
Yeah, just the vaccinations. Like, what as lawyers and as contractors and as association members, how are you tackling this issue?
I'm trying to think if the right word is many or any clients that are requiring vaccines of their workforce right now. However, I do have clients that are requiring non-vaccinated employees, obviously, to wear face masks. And if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a face mask. So that's a pretty common scenario. There's a lot of encouragement to get the vaccine, of course. But I don't have any employers that I'm working with that are actually mandating that their employees receive the vaccine at this point. Although I think I read an article yesterday that referenced a couple large employers that are beginning to require it. And I think that's relatively recent development. The vaccines weren't widely available until fairly recently. And I think that you're going to start to see more of that as we move forward here.
Albert, any insight on that?
For our contractors, there's I know some of the unions have mandated that the union employees receive vaccinations, and they're encouraging their members to receive the vaccinations. So there's a large awareness campaign trying to educate people more than push them along. They're trying to educate people and say, hey, look, this is the effect these have, and so we're seeing a lot of that. It's just a mixed bag of who's getting vaccinated, who's not. I don't ask, so I don't know.
Right. That was going to be my next question too, is how do you navigate those waters? Like, how are businesses able to ask if their employees are vaccinated? Is there, there's got to be some sort of pushback with that, with HIPAA and the violations and such. So John or Trent, do you have any insight on that?
Sure, I can pipe up. I think what's been interesting about most of the COVID-19 process is a lot of the things that you couldn't do under the ADA, like ask, what's the matter with you, that kind of stuff. It's fine to do that. So the CDC even came out recently and said there's absolutely no problem with you asking whether or not somebody's been vaccinated. And it's interesting, you know, Hannah, recently, I think just last week, the first real federal case on this issue came out regarding some hospital systems in Houston. And in that case, the court said, yeah, you can absolutely mandate vaccines. There's nothing wrong with that. There are a couple of things that we always tell contractors to watch out for. One is the potential for religious discrimination under Title VII, and the other is if you've got a potential medical disability or something that would prevent you from getting a vaccine under the ADA. But to echo what John said, I think you are absolutely going to start seeing a trend towards more businesses mandating it, especially when I start to see things like the Delta variant out there that's causing some concern. So I think that you will see an increased trend towards mandating.
John or Albert?
I could only repeat what Trent said.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with the employer asking the employee whether they've been vaccinated or not. And I think it's important for people to understand that, because I've had a number of questions from contractors. Hey, isn't that a HIPAA violation?
Right.
First of all, no, because you're not a healthcare institution. But second of all, no, because it's clear under the law now that you can't ask. And when you have the government agencies coming out with the clear advice, like Trent just pointed out, that you can ask, I mean, you're in a very good position to ask your employees if you feel like that's something you want to do.
Go ahead, Hannah.
I was just going to ask what was making their phones ring these days.
Contract negotiations.
Yeah.
That's actually one of them. I've gotten a number of calls over the last few weeks from employers that are wondering, hey, can I ask my employees? I'm concerned about asking about their medical information. You know, and I'm going, yeah, I mean, you treat their response as confidential, but as long as you're dealing with it that way, you're fine. I mean, you absolutely can ask. And really, contractors are in practice of that, because a lot of them were taking temperatures when somebody went on the job site, right? So it's the same darn thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hannah, I'd say it's either vaccine guidance or material shortages and material delays. That's the hot button right now.
Yep.
That's a whole nother webinar right there.
Yeah.
There's so much to educate everybody on. But I know as we move forward, we're going to have more questions on contractor misclassification, and we'd love to get you guys together as we move forward, because I know that there'll be more questions. But bottom line, I want to thank everybody for your time today and sharing your insights for contractors and employers, because that's what our passion is to help people improve their businesses with great information. If anybody who's listening or watching has any questions, make sure you reach out to us at wconline.com or roofingcontractor.com. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for our free e-newsletters, our free e-magazines. It's free to register for our website, so you can always go online and watch any updated content and videos like this that we may be posting. And also, please stay safe and healthy. We look forward to seeing you next time.